GPS wanted to take me back the long way. I let it. I wasn't in a hurry to get there, and the extra 20 minutes through the old 2-lane highway meant I didn't have to think about what I was walking into. The cornfields on either side hadn't changed. The grain elevator at the edge of town still had the same faded mural. A red barn, a blue sky, the name of the county in block letters. I remembered thinking that mural was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen when I was 9 years old. I didn't feel that way anymore, but I didn't feel nothing either. I turned down Millbrook Road without the GPS telling me to. My father's retirement ceremony was in 3 days, 32 years with the Hargrove County Sheriff's Department. He'd made undersheriff before his knees gave out and forced him toward a desk, and the department was throwing him a proper send-off at the Elks Lodge on 5th Street. The whole town would be there. People who'd known him since he was a patrol deputy in his 20s. People who'd known me when I was a little girl sitting in the front pew of Calvary Baptist with my hair in 2 braids. My grandmother had done that morning. I hadn't been home in 14 months. That wasn't an accident. My stepmother had made it very clear at Christmas 2 years ago that my presence at family events was something she tolerated, not welcomed. She didn't say it like that. She never said anything like that directly. She said it in the way she rearranged the seating so I was always at the far end of the table from my father. She said it in the way she talked over me when I was mid-sentence. She said it in the way she smiled at everyone else and then let her face go still when she looked at me. Her name was Pamela. She'd married my father 6 years ago, after my mother passed. She was from Hargrove County too, which meant everyone knew her, and everyone loved her, and everyone thought she was exactly what my father needed. She brought casseroles to church potlucks and knew everyone's grandmother by her first name and laughed at the right moments. She was very good at being liked. She was not good at being honest. My father thought she was wonderful. My father thought I was difficult. He'd said so once, not knowing I could hear him through the kitchen door. She's always been difficult, Pam. Don't take it personally. I stood outside that door for a long time before I walked back to the car, drove to the motel on Route 9, and checked in for the night instead of staying in the house. That was 14 months ago. I came back for him, not because things had changed, they hadn't. I came back because 32 years is 32 years and he was still my father, and I was not going to let Pamela be the reason I wasn't there for that. I pulled into the driveway of the house where I grew up and sat in the car for a moment. The porch light was on, even though it was the middle of the afternoon. My father had always left the porch light on. I used to think it meant he was waiting for me. I'd stopped thinking that. He came to the door before I even got out of the car. He looked older than I remembered. His hair had gone fully white now, and he moved with the careful slowness of a man whose body had started keeping score. But he was smiling, and the smile was real. "You made it," he said. "I told you I would." "I know." He hugged me on the porch. He smelled like the same aftershave he'd worn my whole life. Traffic bad on the interstate. Not too bad. Pamela appeared behind him in the doorway. She was wearing a cream-coloured blouse and a strand of pearls, which I thought was a lot of effort for a Tuesday afternoon, but maybe she'd had somewhere to be. She smiled at me with her whole face. Pamela was a very good smiler. "Sweetheart," she said, "it's so good to see you." "You too," I said. Neither of us meant it. We both knew that. We were very polite about it. I stayed in my old room, which Pamela had redecorated with a coastal theme that had nothing to do with the landlocked county we lived in, Shiplap. A sign that said, "Breathe in," script lettering, a throw pillow with an anchor on it. I put my bag on the anchor pillow and sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the ceiling where I used to have glow-in-the-dark stars stuck in a pattern I'd copied from a library book about constellations. The stars were gone. The ceiling was painted the colour of sea glass. I breathed, as instructed, and went to help with dinner. The next 2 days were fine in the way that things can be fine on the surface while being quietly not fine underneath. My father and I talked about his years at the department, the cases he was proud of, the ones that still bothered him. We drove out to the cemetery and put fresh flowers on my mother's grave and didn't say much, and that was okay. That was its own kind of conversation. Pamela was around. She cooked and she organized and she made comments. She was very good at comments. They came in softly, like she was just making conversation. "You look tired," she told me on Wednesday evening. "Long hours at that job of yours?" "I'm fine," I said. "I just worry you've always pushed yourself so hard. Your father says the same thing." She glanced at him across the kitchen. He was reading the newspaper and didn't look up. "We just wonder sometimes if you're happy, if what you're doing is really sustainable for someone your age." I was 31. I had been doing my job for 6 years. I didn't say any of that. "I'm happy," I said. She patted my hand and moved on to stirring something on the stove. The ceremony was on Thursday evening. The Elks Lodge had been decorated with bunting in the department's colours and photographs from my father's career. There was a long table near the entrance for name tags, a donation jar for a charity he'd supported for years, a table of desserts that had clearly been organised by women from the church. I recognised the handwriting on the labels. Some of those women had brought food to our house when my mother was sick. The room was already half full when we arrived. My father was greeted the way men are greeted after decades in a small town, with handshakes and slapped shoulders and women who hugged him too long. He was in his dress uniform for the last time, and he stood a little straighter in it, like the uniform was reminding him of something about himself. I wore a dark blazer and slacks, nothing notable. I'd learned a long time ago not to make myself notable in rooms where Pamela was also present. She was in her element, her rose-coloured dress, heels, her hair done. She knew everyone, and everyone knew her, and she moved through the room like she'd organised it herself, which, to be fair, she partially had. I found a spot near the side wall and talked to people I'd known growing up. My father's old partner, who told me 3 stories that ended the same way. A woman from the dispatch team who remembered bringing me cookies when I used to visit the station as a kid. A retired deputy who called me by my father's last name the way old-timers did, like you were an extension of the man they knew. At some point, Pamela materialized beside me. This was a thing she did. You would not see her coming. She would just be there. "Everyone's so happy you could make it," she said. "It's a big night for him," I said. "It really is." She looked out at the room, at my father accepting a plaque from the county commissioner. "He worked so hard for so long. He deserves this." "He does." She turned to look at me, and the warmth in her expression adjusted itself into something more careful. "I heard someone ask him about you earlier. What you were up to. He said he wasn't really sure." She paused. "He shouldn't have to say that. He shouldn't have to not know what his own daughter does." I looked at my father. He was laughing at something the commissioner had said. "He knows what I do," I said. "Well," she tilted her head, "he knows the job title, but when they asked him if you were still with the same organization, he wasn't sure, whether you'd moved on, whether things were going well." Another pause. "He doesn't say so, but I think it hurts him, not knowing." This was Pamela's technique. She didn't attack. She delivered observations, observations that just happened to land like small, precise cuts. I said, "I'll talk to him about it." She nodded like that was satisfactory and drifted back into the room. I stood by the wall for a minute, maybe 2. I had learned years ago that reacting to Pamela in rooms where other people could see was not useful. She was too good at it. She could make anything you said sound like proof that you were difficult. There was a woman on the other side of the room I didn't recognize. She'd arrived late. I'd noticed because the room had moved around her arrival the way rooms do when someone unexpected and significant walks in. She was in her late 50s, I guessed, grey at her temples. She wore a dark blazer, and had the kind of stillness that some people carry. Not stillness like she was trying to be unobtrusive, stillness like she didn't need to move to take up space. 2 men I didn't recognize had come in with her. They hadn't got name tags. I went to refill my water at the drinks table, which happened to be in her general direction. I wasn't paying close attention to anything in particular when I heard Pamela's voice carry across a nearby cluster of people. She was talking to one of the churchwomen, but she pitched her voice at the volume she used when she wanted people adjacent to hear. Always been like that, even growing up. Her mother was the same way. Lovely woman, God rest her, but she couldn't keep anything organized, couldn't follow through. A small, sighing laugh. I've tried. I really have. But there's only so much you can do for someone who won't help themselves. I didn't turn around. I knew she wasn't talking about anyone else. The churchwoman said something I couldn't hear. Well, that's just it, Pamela said. She had this opportunity and well, you know how these things go. The department offered her something she couldn't commit, and now she's just kind of... The sentence trailed off in a way that was more damaging than if she'd finished it. My father was 6 feet away. He was not paying attention to Pamela's conversation. He was talking to the county commissioner. I got my water. I stood by the drinks table. I thought about my mother, who had told me once that the most powerful thing you can do in a room full of people is exactly nothing, and wait. I was thinking about that when the woman in the dark blazer turned from where she'd been standing and looked directly at me. Not in the way that people look at you when they think they recognize you from somewhere, not in the uncertain way. Directly and immediately, like something had been confirmed rather than discovered. She crossed the room toward me. The 2 men who'd arrived with her noticed and turned to watch. I set my water down. I didn't expect to see you here, she said. Her voice was measured and warm at the same time. I didn't see your name on the guest list. I came for my father, I said, the honoree. She nodded slowly. Len Marin is your father. She said it like she was recalibrating something. Yes, ma'am. I should have made the connection. She shook her head once. You kept your mother's name. I did. Smart, she said, and then something shifted in her expression. A formal settling, the way a person looks when they're about to do something in an official capacity, even when they're not officially on duty. She extended her hand and I took it. Dr. Marin, she said loudly enough that the people nearby turned. It's an honor. I wasn't aware you were attending tonight. She paused and then she added with the same measured clarity, for those around us, Dr. Marin. Marin is the Deputy Director of the Department of Justice's National Institute for Public Safety Research. She built the Forensic Partnership Program that, among other things, directly supports departments like this one. The churchwoman went very quiet. I heard Pamela stop talking. She was also, the woman continued, still holding my hand, the youngest person ever to hold a senior advisory position in our division when she was appointed at 28. So I hope you'll forgive me for being a little formal about it. I did not look at Pamela. I looked at my father. He had turned. The commissioner had turned. My father's face had done something I didn't have a word for. Not embarrassment, not pride exactly. Something in between those 2 things that was also neither one of them. Something that looked like a man realizing he'd been standing in a room with a door he hadn't known was there. The woman, her name was Patricia Osei, and I would learn later that she'd been invited as a guest of the county commissioner to discuss a regional grant initiative, which was why she'd been in Hargrove County at all, smiled at me and said, "Is there somewhere we can catch up properly? I'd love to hear what you're working on." "Of course," I said. We moved toward the corner of the room. As I turned to follow her, I caught my father's face one more time. He was watching me. The plaque was still in his hands. He looked like he was seeing me from a different distance than usual. Not farther away, but like he'd stepped back, and the whole picture had come into focus for the first time. I thought about all the things I could have said over the years, All the dinners where I'd smiled and stayed quiet while Pamela delivered her careful observations. All the times I'd driven to that motel on Route 9 instead of having the fight. All the times my father had not looked up from the newspaper. I didn't feel vindicated. That's not exactly the right word. I felt like someone had finally just turned the lights on in a room that had been dim for a very long time. Not dramatic, not like a speech, just visible. Finally, plainly, factually visible. Patricia O'Say asked me about a policy paper I'd co-authored the previous year, and I told her about it, and we talked for 45 minutes, and the ceremony went on around us, and my father received his plaque from the county commissioner, and the church ladies cut the cake, and Pamela moved through the room in her rose-coloured dress. Later, when most of the guests had gone, my father found me by the dessert table. We were alone for the first time since we'd arrived. He stood beside me and looked at the table for a moment, like he was studying the labels on the desserts. "Pam said she didn't know you were that high up," he said finally. "I know." He was quiet for a moment. I didn't know either. Another pause. I should have known. I didn't say yes. You should have. I didn't say anything for a moment. Then I said, "You could come visit. I have a guest room. I'd show you around." He looked at me. "Whenever you want," I said. He nodded. He put his hand on my shoulder briefly, the way he used to when I was a kid, and he was proud of something I'd done and didn't have the words for it. Then he picked up a piece of chocolate cake and turned to find someone who'd called his name from across the room. I drove back to the motel on Route 9 that night, not because I had to. He'd asked me to stay at the house, but I wanted the quiet and the space and the drive back through town with the windows cracked and the radio finding its own station. The mural on the grain elevator was lit by a street light as I passed. Red barn, blue sky, county name in block letters. I used to think it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. Maybe it still was. Not for the same reasons. For the reason that it was still exactly where I'd left it, and I was not. I keep thinking about that drive back to the motel. The windows down, the radio finding its own station, the grain elevator passing in the dark. Nothing dramatic had happened by some measures. No one had yelled, no one had cried, a woman had shaken my hand and said some words, and the room had gone quiet, and my father had looked at me differently than he had in years. That was all. But I'd been sitting with why it hit me as hard as it did, and I think I know now. For a long time I made the mistake of believing that if I just kept my head down and did the work, the truth would eventually speak for itself in private. That the people who mattered would quietly figure it out. That I didn't need to say anything because eventually the record would make itself clear. And the work part was right. The record part was right. What I got wrong was expecting that silence on its own was enough to protect me from Pamela's version of events. Silence isn't neutral in a room where someone else is talking. It just leaves space for a different story to fill. What I had to learn, slowly, uncomfortably, over years, was that doing the right thing isn't enough if you're not also willing to stay in the room. I kept leaving. Motel on Route 9. 14 months of distance. Every time things got hard, I had a very principled, very sensible reason for stepping back. I told myself I was taking the high road. But taking the high road and disappearing are different things. And I spent too long confusing them. The reason I could stand at that dessert table and feel steady when Patricia O'Say said what she said, the reason I didn't need to turn around and look at my stepmother, wasn't luck. It was 6 years of unglamorous, frequently frustrating work that I'd chosen to do, honestly, even when it wasn't recognized. Even when my father didn't know the details, even when Pamela was in the next room delivering her observations to whoever would listen, that steadiness didn't come from the moment. It came from everything before the moment. That's the part no one tells you clearly enough. The recognition, when it comes, is just the surface. What's underneath it is 1,000 small decisions to keep going anyway. To do the work with integrity even when the audience is no one. to develop yourself in ways that have nothing to do with proving anything to anybody, and everything to do with becoming the kind of person who can stand in that room and feel the ground under their feet. My father called me 2 weeks after I got home. He didn't say much. He said he'd looked up the program Patricia O'Say had mentioned, read about it. He said, "I didn't know you'd done all that." I told him that was okay. He said it wasn't, really. We stayed on the phone for a while after that, not saying a lot, just being on the phone. I don't know what happens with Pamela. That's not mine to resolve. I know what happens with me. I go back to the work. I stay in the room.